The Vethrani Empire had ruled the Orion Arm for 12,000 years. Their ships numbered in the billions. Their colonies spread across 40,000 worlds. Their technology could crack planets and build artificial suns. When they spoke, entire civilizations trembled and obeyed without question. So when the small, ugly vessel appeared at the edge of Vethrani space, nobody really cared. The ship was barely 300 meters long. It moved slowly, clumsily, burning some kind of primitive chemical fuel that left a visible trail in the darkness of space. The hull was covered in strange markings that no translation matrix could understand. Sensor readings showed it carried perhaps 200 life forms inside. Creatures made of soft tissue that breathed oxygen and needed water to survive. Commander Thraxus of the Vethrani border fleet received the report on his display screen. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds before dismissing it with a wave of his long blue fingers. "Another primitive species wandering into our space," he said to his second officer. "How boring. Send them to the processing station on Kethril 9. The bureaucrats there will handle the registration." "Should we scan them for weapons, Commander?" the officer asked. Thraxus laughed. The sound echoed through the bridge of his massive warship, a vessel that was 17 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy small moons. "Weapons? Look at that pathetic thing. What could they possibly have that would concern us? A sharp stick? Some kind of explosive powder?" The primitive ship was contacted. Simple pictographic messages were sent, showing them where to go. To everyone's surprise, the creatures responded quickly. They seemed intelligent enough to follow basic instructions. Within 6 hours, the strange vessel had changed course and was heading toward Kethril 9. Nobi gave them another thought. The processing station on Kethril 9 was a structure that floated in space near a dying red star. Millions of beings from thousands of species passed through it every year. Some came to trade, some came seeking refuge, some came because they had no other choice. The Vethrani Empire welcomed all of them, as long as they followed the rules and paid their taxes. The small ship docked at Port 712, a minor docking bay reserved for vessels too small and unimportant to deserve better placement. A processing official named Kareth was assigned to handle the new arrivals. Kareth had worked at the station for 80 years. He had seen every kind of alien imaginable. Nothing surprised him anymore. The creatures that walked off the ship surprised him. They stood on 2 legs, like many species did. They had 2 arms, 2 eyes, and flat faces with soft skin. Their bodies were wrapped in strange fabric coverings of different colors. They moved with an unusual combination of caution and curiosity, looking around at everything with wide, bright eyes. "Welcome to the Vethrani Empire," Kareth said, his translation device converting his words into sounds the creatures could understand. "Please state your species name, planet of origin, and purpose for entering our space." One of the creatures stepped forward. It was slightly taller than the others, with short dark fur on top of its head and strange clear coverings over its eyes. "We are humans," the creature said. "We come from a planet called Earth, in a star system you probably call Selthri. We are explorers. We have been traveling for 50 years to find other intelligent life in the universe." Kareth's 4 eyes blinked slowly. 50 years of travel to cover what Vethrani ships could cross in a few days. These creatures were truly primitive. He felt a small wave of pity for them. "I see," he said. "And how many of your kind exist on this Earth?" "When we left, there were about 12 billion of us," the human replied. Kareth made a note. 12 billion. A decent number for a primitive species, but nothing remarkable. The Vethrani Empire had a population of over 800 trillion across all their worlds. These humans were barely a rounding error. "You will need to complete standard registration," Kareth explained. "Your species will be catalogued and given a designation number. You will be assigned a sector where you may establish trade relations with other minor species. Any attempt to enter core Vethrani space without permission will result in severe consequences. Do you understand?" The human nodded slowly. "We understand, but we would like to learn more about your empire. We have many questions." Kareth almost laughed. Of course they had questions. Every primitive species had questions when they first encountered the empire. They wanted to know about the technology, the history, the power. They were like small children standing before giants, amazed by everything they saw. "Questions are fine," Kareth said. "Answers will cost you. The Vethrani Empire trades in value. What do you have to offer?" The human looked back at its companions. They spoke quietly among themselves in their strange language. Then the leader turned back to Kareth. "We have brought samples of our art, our music, and our stories," the human said. "We have brought seeds from our plants and information about our sciences. We have brought recordings of our history and examples of our crafts." Kareth tried not to show his disappointment. Art and music from a species that had only just discovered space travel. Stories from creatures who had never seen the wonders of the galaxy. These things had almost no value in the great markets of the empire. But protocol demanded that he accept whatever tribute was offered. "Very well," he said. "Your offerings will be evaluated and given appropriate credit. In the meantime, you will be assigned temporary quarters in the outer ring of the station. Food and water suitable for your biology will be provided. Do not cause trouble. do not interfere with station operations, and do not attempt to access restricted areas. The humans agreed to everything. They were polite, cooperative, and seemingly grateful for even the smallest kindness. Kareth finished the registration quickly and sent them on their way. Within an hour, he had already forgotten their names. The humans were assigned quarters in Section 42, a cramped and poorly maintained area where dozens of other minor species lived. Their neighbors included the Krix, a species of small insect-like beings who farmed fungus. There were the Melorens, large, slow creatures who communicated through color changes in their skin. There were the Tith, the Verix, the Quan, and 30 other species who had wandered into Vethrani space and been processed just like the humans. None of them mattered. None of them were important. They existed in the shadows of the Empire, buying and selling among themselves, living their small lives while the Vethrani controlled everything that truly mattered. The humans settled into their quarters without complaint. They smiled at their neighbors. They asked questions about everything. They watched and listened and learned. Nobody noticed that they had started taking notes. Nobody noticed that they had begun talking to every species they encountered, learning languages and customs and histories. Nobody noticed that behind those soft, flat faces, something was calculating, something was planning. The Vethrani Empire had existed for 12,000 years. In all that time, they had never once considered that something small and primitive could ever become a threat. They were about to learn a very important lesson about the dangers of not paying attention. 3 years passed on Kethral 9. In that time, the humans had spread throughout the station like water seeping through cracks in stone. They appeared everywhere, always friendly, always curious, always asking questions that seemed harmless enough. Captain Maria Chen sat in a small food hall in the outer ring, sharing a meal with a Krix trader named Click Click Whistle. The insect being was only half a meter tall, with 6 legs and compound eyes that reflected rainbow colors under the station lights. Most species ignored the Krix. They were considered too small, too weak, and too unimportant to bother with. Maria had learned that this was exactly why they were so valuable. The fungus we grow can process almost any organic waste, Click Click Whistle explained, his tiny mandibles moving rapidly. We can break down toxic compounds that would kill most species. We can create fertilizer from garbage. We can clean contaminated water in hours. Maria nodded, making careful notes on her tablet. And the Vethrani don't use this technology. The Krix made a sound that might have been laughter. The Vethrani have machines for everything. Why would they need small bugs like us? They buy our fungus for their gardens sometimes. Pretty decorations. They never think about what else it could do. This was a pattern Maria had noticed again and again. The Vethrani were so powerful, so advanced, that they had stopped paying attention to anything below their level. They had machines that could do almost anything. They had technology that seemed like magic, but they had also lost something important along the way. They had lost the ability to see potential in unexpected places. Dr. James Wright, the chief scientist aboard the human ship, had made similar discoveries. He spent his days in the station's public archives, accessing whatever information was freely available. That Vethrani didn't bother to restrict access to basic knowledge. Why would they? What could a primitive species possibly do with technical manuals that were thousands of years out of date? But James had realized something crucial. Those outdated manuals contained technology that was still centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. And more importantly, they showed the foundations upon which all Vethrani science was built. They've been building on the same basic principles for over 8,000 years. James explained to the other humans during one of their secret meetings. Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also incredibly rigid. They stopped innovating because they reached a level where they didn't need to innovate anymore. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okonkwo, the ship's chief engineer, leaned forward with interest. What does that mean for us? James pulled up a holographic display showing complex mathematical equations. It means they have blind spots, big ones. Their entire power grid system is based on centralized nodes. Their communication networks all run through specific relay points. Their defensive systems are designed to stop threats they understand. They've never encountered anything truly unexpected because nothing has ever challenged them. The humans had been busy during their 3 years on the station. They had made friends with the Krix, learning about biological processing and organic chemistry. They had befriended the Melorens, who had an almost telepathic ability to read emotional states. They had studied the Tith, who could survive in vacuum for hours at a time. They had learned from the Verix, who could see electromagnetic frequencies invisible to most species. Every minor species had something unique. Every ignored civilization had developed abilities that the Vethrani had never bothered to notice, and the humans had been taking careful notes about all of it. Meanwhile, Kareth, the processing official, had almost completely forgotten about the humans. He was too busy dealing with the endless stream of arrivals and departures, the constant paperwork, the boring routine of station life. When a colleague mentioned seeing some of the human creatures in the lower trading districts, Kareth just shrugged. "Still here, are they?" he said. "I'm surprised they haven't died from boredom yet." The truth was that the humans were far from bored. They were working harder than they had ever worked in their lives. In the cargo hold of their small ship, A group of engineers had completely rebuilt their engine system, using concepts from the Vethrani technical manuals combined with materials traded from a dozen different species. They had created something new. It wasn't Vethrani technology. It wasn't human technology. It was something in between, a hybrid system that took the best ideas from multiple sources and combined them in ways nobody had tried before. The new engine was smaller, more efficient, and could achieve speeds that should have been impossible for a ship of their size. Similar projects were happening in every corner of the human community. Medical researchers had combined Crick's biological compounds with human pharmaceutical knowledge to create new medicines. Communication specialists had developed translation algorithms that worked faster and more accurately than any Vethrani system. Defense engineers had designed protective shields based on principles the Vethrani had abandoned as inefficient thousands of years ago. The humans were not trying to match Vethrani technology. They knew that was impossible. Instead, they were looking for gaps, weaknesses, and opportunities that the great empire had overlooked. Back on Earth, things had been changing too. The first human ship, named the Horizon, had sent regular reports home using a quantum communication link that the Vethrani sensors couldn't detect. These reports had sparked a revolution in human science and industry. For 50 years, Earth had believed it was alone in the universe. Then the Horizon had discovered otherwise and everything changed. New ships were being built. New technologies were being developed. New strategies were being planned. The human population, which had felt so small when compared to the Vethrani billions, was suddenly united by a common purpose that had never existed before. First contact with alien life had reminded humanity of something important. They were creative, they were adaptable, they were stubborn, and they absolutely refused to accept that their place in the universe was to live in the shadows of someone else's empire. On Kethro 9, Maria Chen received a coded message from Earth. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Then she gathered the other senior officers for an emergency meeting. Earth is sending more ships, she announced. 12 vessels, each carrying 2,000 people. They'll arrive in about 6 months. The others exchanged glances. 12 ships was nothing compared to the Vethrani fleet. 2,000 people per ship was barely a drop in the cosmic ocean. But it was a start. What are our orders? Sarah asked. Maria smiled, but there was something hard and determined in her eyes. We're being told to keep doing exactly what we've been doing, learn everything we can, make alliances with every species willing to talk to us, find every weakness, every blind spot, every opportunity. And then what? James asked. Maria looked around at her crew, these brave people who had traveled across the stars to find their place in a galaxy that barely noticed they existed. Then we show them that small things can grow, she said. We show them that being ignored was the biggest mistake they ever made. Outside, the station continued its endless routine. Vethrani officials processed new arrivals without interest. Traders bought and sold goods in markets that had functioned the same way for thousands of years. Ships came and went, carrying cargo and passengers across an empire that considered itself eternal and unchanging. And in their small corner of the outer ring, the humans continued their quiet work. They smiled, they asked questions, they learned the storm was coming, but nobody could see the clouds gathering on the horizon. 10 years after the first human ship arrived at Kethro 9, something strange began happening in the outer sectors of Vethrani space. Minor species that had lived in poverty and obscurity for centuries were suddenly becoming prosperous. Trade routes that had been dormant for generations were coming back to life. New technologies were appearing in the markets. Things that nobody recognized and nobody could explain. Merchant Prince Velith of the 3rd Commerce Division noticed the changes first. He was responsible for tracking trade flows throughout the outer regions, a job that most Vethrani considered unimportant. After all, what happened among the minor species was of little consequence to the Empire. They traded their worthless goods and lived their small lives, and the Vethrani collected their taxes without much interest. But the numbers were starting to look unusual. Commerce in the outer sectors has increased by 400% over the past 5 years. Velith reported to his superiors. New products are entering the markets at an unprecedented rate. Species that previously had nothing to trade are suddenly generating significant economic activity. His supervisor, a senior administrator named Drathus, barely looked up from his work. And why should this concern me? Let the primitives play their games. As long as they pay their taxes, I don't care what they do. That's just it, Velith said carefully. They are paying their taxes, every single credit, but they're also accumulating wealth at a rate that shouldn't be possible. Something is organizing them. Something is changing the way they operate. Drathus waved a dismissive hand. You're seeing patterns that don't exist. The outer sectors have always had small fluctuations in economic activity. It means nothing. Velith wanted to argue further, but he knew it was pointless. The Vethrani leadership had ruled for so long that they had forgotten how to recognize threats. Their minds were locked into patterns of thinking that had worked for 12,000 years. Why would they change now? Meanwhile, humanity was growing. The original ship, the Horizon, had been joined by dozens of others over the years. Human settlements had sprung up on a dozen different stations throughout the outer sectors. They lived alongside the Krix and the Melorins, the Teth and the Variks, and hundreds of other species who had been overlooked by the Empire. But unlike the humans didn't overlook anyone. They formed partnerships. They shared technology. They created trading networks that connected species who had never communicated before. They built alliances based on mutual benefit rather than domination, and they taught others to do the same. Maria Chen, now the unofficial leader of humanity's diplomatic efforts, stood before a gathering of representatives from 30 different species. The meeting was held in an abandoned cargo bay on Cathral 9, far from the watchful eyes of Vethrani officials. "We are all small," Maria said, her voice carrying across the crowded space. "We are all ignored. We are all considered worthless by the empire that rules this galaxy. But together, we are something more. Together, we are a force that they cannot dismiss." A Meloran delegate shifted its massive body, its skin flickering through shades of green and blue that indicated cautious interest. "What do you propose?" "Human. We cannot fight the Veth. Their ships would destroy us in moments." "I'm not talking about fighting," Maria replied. "I'm talking about building." The Vethrani control the galaxy through force and technology. But there are other kinds of power. Economic power, social power, the power of connections and relationships and shared purpose. She activated a holographic display showing a network of lines connecting points across the outer sectors. "This is what we've built over the past decade. Trade routes between species that never traded before. Communication links that bypass Vethrani monitoring systems. Shared research projects that combine the unique abilities of multiple civilizations." The delegates looked at the display with growing amazement. The network was vast, far larger than any of them had realized. Thousands of connections spread across hundreds of star systems, forming a web of cooperation that existed entirely beneath the notice of the Empire. "We call it the Coalition," Maria continued. "Not a military alliance, not a government, just a promise that we will help each other, that we will share what we know, that we will work together to build something better than what we have now." A Krix representative made a rapid clicking sound that translated as excitement. "This is remarkable, human. But what happens when the Vethrani finally notice? What happens when they decide to crush this coalition of yours?" Maria smiled. "That's exactly what we've been preparing for. Not to fight them directly, but to make sure they can't destroy what we've built. Every connection in this network is designed to be resilient. If they cut one link, 10 others remain. If they attack one species, the others will support them. We've created something they've never faced before. Not an enemy to defeat, but a community that refuses to be erased." The meeting lasted for hours as delegates discussed possibilities and concerns. By the end, 27 of the 30 species had agreed to join the coalition formally. The other 3 promised to consider it. Back on Earth, the changes were even more dramatic. Humanity had entered a new era of development. The technologies and knowledge brought back from the galaxy had transformed every aspect of human society. Clean energy systems based on principles discovered by the Variks, medical treatments derived from Krix biological research, communication networks inspired by the collective minds of the Tith. Earth's population had grown to 15 billion. But resources were no longer a problem. Space stations orbited the planet, housing millions more. Mining operations in the asteroid belt provided raw materials in quantities that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier, and the shipyards were busy. Hundreds what vessels were under construction at any given time. Not warships, at least not primarily. Transport ships, exploration vessels, cargo carriers, ships designed to connect humanity with its new allies across the stars. Admiral Wei Zhong stood on the observation deck of Earth's largest orbital station, looking out at the fleet taking shape before him. He had been a young officer when the Horizon first departed. Now he was old, his hair gray and his face lined with age. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still working. "We're not building an army," he said to his aide. "We're building a civilization. The Vethrani will never understand that. They've spent so long ruling through fear that they've forgotten there are other ways to gain power." His aide nodded thoughtfully. "But eventually they will notice us. Eventually they will come." "Yes," the Admiral agreed. "And when they do, they'll find something they never expected. Not a collection of primitive species cowering in the shadows. Not an enemy trying to challenge their military might. They'll find a community of equals working together toward goals they can't even imagine." He turned away from the window, a small smile on his weathered face. "The Vethrani have been the center of their own universe for 12,000 years. It's time someone reminded them that the universe doesn't revolve around anyone." In the outer sectors, the coalition continued to grow. New species joined every month, drawn by the promise of cooperation and mutual support. Trade flourished. Knowledge was shared. Boundaries that had separated civilizations for millennia began to dissolve, and still, the Vethrani paid no attention. Their sensors detected the increased traffic in the outer sectors, but their analysts dismissed it as noise. Their intelligence services received reports of unusual activity, but their leaders ignored the warnings. Their economic models showed unexpected patterns, but their experts explained them away as statistical errors. The greatest empire the galaxy had ever known was watching a revolution unfold right under their noses. and they saw nothing at all. 20 years after the Horizon first arrived at Kethral 9, the Vethrani Empire finally woke up to the reality of what was happening in their outer territories. High Lord Ethros, Supreme Commander of the Empire's military forces, stared at the intelligence reports spread across his massive desk. His blue skin had turned pale with a mixture of anger and confusion. Around him, a dozen senior advisors sat in terrified silence. "How is this possible?" Ethros demanded. "How did we not see this happening?" Nobody wanted to answer. The reports told a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. A network of minor species had built a vast economic and social alliance right under the Empire's nose. Human beings, those primitive creatures who had arrived on a primitive ship decades ago, were apparently at the center of it all. The humans number approximately 800 million now, Intelligence Director Kareth reported carefully. They have settlements on 47 stations and 17 minor worlds throughout the outer sectors. They have formed partnerships with over 300 different species. 300 species, Ethros repeated in disbelief. Why weren't we monitoring this? Kareth swallowed nervously. We were monitoring standard threat indicators, High Lord, military buildups, weapons manufacturing, hostile communications. The humans engaged in none of these activities. They simply traded and talked and helped their neighbors. Helped their neighbors, Ethros said slowly, as if tasting something bitter, and somehow this turned into a threat to the Empire. Not a military threat, Kareth clarified. At least, not directly, but their economic influence has grown enormously. The outer sectors are no longer dependent on core Empire markets for essential goods. They're trading among themselves, using systems and routes that we don't control. Another advisor spoke up. There's more, High Lord. The technology gap is shrinking, that humans have been combining knowledge from multiple species to create innovations that we didn't anticipate. Their ships are faster now. Their communications are more secure. Their manufacturing capabilities have improved dramatically. Ethros slammed his fist on the desk. Then we crush them. Send the Third Fleet to their primary settlements. Arrest their leaders. Dissolve this coalition they've built. The room fell silent again. Finally, Strategic Advisor Melith found the courage to speak. That may be complicated, High Lord. The coalition is not a traditional organization. It has no central leadership that we can capture, no capital that we can occupy, no military that we can defeat. It's a network of relationships spread across thousands of locations. If we attack one point, the others will simply work around the damage, then attack them all. Ethros snapped. That would require deploying forces across the entire Outer Rim, Melith replied. It would take years to complete such an operation. During that time, our core territories would be left undefended against other potential threats. Ethros leaned back in his chair, his mind struggling to process a problem that didn't fit any pattern he understood. The Vethrani had always solved problems through overwhelming force. They saw a threat, they destroyed it. But this threat had no clear target. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. What do these humans want? He asked finally. What are their demands? Kareth consulted his reports. They have made no demands, High Lord. They have not asked for territory or resources or political recognition. They simply continue building their alliances and expanding their trade networks. If they have long-term goals, they haven't shared them with us. This was perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all. Enemies who wanted something could be negotiated with. Enemies who wanted nothing were unpredictable and dangerous. Meanwhile, the coalition was preparing for exactly this moment. Maria Chen, now in her 60s but still sharp and determined, received word of the Empire's awakening within hours of the High Lord's meeting. Human communication networks, enhanced with technology borrowed from a dozen different species, could intercept and decode Vethrani transmissions with ease. She gathered her senior advisors in a secure location deep within an asteroid mining facility. They're finally paying attention, she announced. Intelligence reports indicate that the Vethrani leadership is debating how to respond to our existence. Dr. James Wright, gray-haired now but still brilliant, pulled up a holographic display. Our projections suggest they'll try a military response first. It's what they know. It's what they've always done. Let them try, said Sarah Okonkwo, who now commanded the largest human fleet. We've been preparing for this for 2 decades. We know their vulnerabilities. We know their blind spots. We're not looking to fight them, Maria reminded everyone. Remember our core principle. We don't need to defeat the Vethrani. We just need to make sure they can't defeat us. Every day that we survive, every year that we grow, we become more established, more essential to the economy of the outer sectors, more difficult to remove without causing massive disruption. A Crix representative named Swift's cracked tone clicked urgently. The Empire has never tolerated defiance. They will send their warships. They will try to make an example of us. Then we give them nothing to shoot at, Maria replied. We scatter, we hide, we use the networks we've built to disappear into the vastness of space. And then, when they've wasted resources chasing shadows, we emerge again. Stronger, more connected, more impossible to destroy. The strategy was called the Thousand Streams Defense. Like water flowing around obstacles, the coalition would never stand and fight. Instead, it would split and scatter and reform, always moving, always adapting. The Vethrani fleet could destroy any single target, but they couldn't destroy 10,000 targets spread across 1 billion cubic light-years of space. The first test came 3 months later. Vethrani battle group of 20 warships appeared at Station Kereth 9, the same processing station where humans had first entered Vethrani space decades earlier. The commander demanded the surrender of all human citizens and the dissolution of all coalition agreements. When Maria Chen's recorded message appeared on his screen, the commander was confused. "We thank the Empire for its concern," Maria said calmly. "However, you may have noticed that there are no humans on Kethril 9 anymore. We evacuated 6 weeks ago. The station now houses only Vethrani citizens and registered minor species who have no formal connection to the coalition." The commander checked his senses. She was right. The human quarters were empty. The human ships were gone. Every trace of their presence had vanished overnight. "Where did they go?" he demanded of the station authorities. Nobody knew, or rather, everybody knew something slightly different. That humans had scattered across dozens of routes, blending into normal traffic, disguised as traders and travelers. Some had gone to other stations. Some had disappeared into the asteroid belts. Some had fled to distant star systems that the Vethrani rarely bothered to monitor. The battle group spent 3 weeks searching. They found nothing. The humans had simply dissolved into the vastness of space like salt dissolving into water. High Lord Ethros received the report with barely controlled fury. "Find them," he ordered. "Find them and destroy them." But finding them proved impossible. Every time the Vethrani fleet appeared at a known coalition location, they found it abandoned. Every time they intercepted human ships, the crews surrendered peacefully and revealed nothing useful under interrogation. Every time they thought they had cornered their quarry, the trap turned out to be empty. The coalition was fighting a war without battles. They were winning by simply refusing to lose. And all the while their networks continued to grow. Species that had been neutral watched the Vethrani chase shadows and came to their own conclusions about who would ultimately triumph. Trade continued. Knowledge was shared. The foundations of a new galactic order were being laid, one connection at a time. The empire that had ruled for 12,000 years was facing an enemy they couldn't understand. Not a military force to be crushed. Not a political movement to be suppressed. Just a community of beings who had decided to work together, instead of serving alone. And there was nothing the Vethrani could do to stop it. 50 years after the Horizon first wandered into Vethrani space, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. High Lord Ethros was long dead, replaced by 3 successors who had each tried and failed to solve the problem of the coalition. The Vethrani Empire still existed, still commanded billions of ships and trillions of citizens, but its power had been hollowed out from within, like a great tree rotting at its core while still appearing strong from the outside. The outer sectors no longer depended on the Empire for anything essential. Coalition trade networks provided food, technology, and resources at lower prices and higher quality than Vethrani merchants could match. Coalition communication systems connected species across vast distances instantly and securely. Coalition shipyards produced vessels that rivaled Vethrani designs in capability while costing a fraction of the price to build and maintain. And humanity had grown. 7 billion humans now lived across the galaxy. They had settled on hundreds of worlds and stations, always alongside their coalition allies rather than dominating them. Human technology had advanced dramatically, but it was never purely human anymore. Every innovation combined knowledge and perspectives from dozens of different species, creating solutions that no single civilization could have developed alone. Maria Chen had died peacefully 15 years earlier, surrounded by friends from 17 different species. Her funeral had been attended by millions across the galaxy, transmitted through coalition networks to every corner of settled space. She had lived just long enough to see her vision becoming reality. Now, a new generation carried forward her work. Ambassador Sophia Rages stood in a meeting chamber that would have been unimaginable half a century earlier. Seated around her were representatives of 473 species, all members of the coalition. Across the table sat a delegation from the Vethrani Empire, their blue faces showing expressions of careful neutrality that could not quite hide their discomfort. "Thank you for agreeing to these negotiations," Sophia said, her voice calm and professional. "We understand that this represents a significant change in imperial policy." The Vethrani delegation leader, a senior diplomat named Terenthos, shifted in his seat. "The Empire has decided that certain accommodations may be necessary. The current situation benefits no one. Trade restrictions have damaged the core economy. Military operations have proven costly and ineffective. It is time to find a different approach." Sophia nodded slowly. She had been preparing for this moment for years. The Vethrani were not surrendering. Their pride would never allow something so straightforward. But they were acknowledging reality in their own way, seeking a face-saving solution to a problem they could no longer ignore. "The coalition has always been willing to cooperate with the Empire," Sophia said. "We have never sought conflict. We have never demanded territory or tribute or recognition. We simply asked to be allowed to live and trade and grow in peace. And you have done so, Terenthos admitted, his voice slightly bitter, quite successfully, despite our best efforts to prevent it. There was a long moment of silence. The history between these two groups was complicated and painful. Decades of the Vethrani trying to crush what they had once ignored. Decades of the coalition surviving, adapting, and growing stronger with each challenge. What we propose, Sophia continued, is a formal treaty of mutual recognition. The coalition will acknowledge the legitimate authority of the Vethrani Empire within its traditional core territories. In return, the Empire will recognize the coalition as an equal partner in galactic affairs, with full rights to govern its own internal matters and conduct its own foreign relations. Terenthos exchanged glances with his fellow delegates. This was unprecedented. The Vethrani had never treated any other power as equal. They had always been the center of their own universe, surrounded by lesser beings who existed at their pleasure. But the universe had changed. The Vethrani could no longer pretend otherwise. "We will consider your proposal," Terenthos said finally, "but I must ask something first. The humans who arrived on that primitive ship 50 years ago, the ones who started all of this, did they know what they were doing? Did they plan this from the beginning?" Sophia thought carefully before answering. She had studied the records of those early years. She knew the stories of Maria Chen and James Wright and Sarah Okonkwo and all the others who had laid the foundations of the coalition. "Honestly, I don't think they had a master plan," she admitted. "They just wanted to survive, to find their place in a galaxy that didn't seem to have room for them. They looked at the situation and asked themselves what they could do with what they had. The answer turned out to be quite a lot." Terenthos shook his head slowly. "We never understood that. We thought power meant military strength and technological superiority. We never considered that there might be other kinds of power. The power of cooperation," Sophia said. "The power of adaptation. The power of treating others as partners instead of subjects. These things may seem small and weak at first, but they grow. They compound. They become something that can't be ignored." The negotiations continued for weeks, but eventually an agreement was reached. The Treaty of Kethril 9, named after the station where humanity had first entered Vethrani space, established a new framework for galactic relations. The old empire would continue to exist, but alongside a coalition that now encompassed more species than the Vethrani had ever bothered to count on Earth. Crowds celebrated the news. Humanity had come so far from those early days of isolation and uncertainty. They had traveled to the stars expecting to find themselves alone in the cosmos. Instead, they had found a galaxy full of wonders and dangers, allies and enemies. They had learned that their greatest strength was not their technology or their military might, but their willingness to connect with others and work together toward common goals. In the archives of the Coalition headquarters, a small museum preserved artifacts from the original Horizon mission, the captain's logs, the first contact protocols, the crude translation devices that had allowed humans to speak with aliens for the first time, and Maria Chen's personal journal, filled with handwritten notes and sketches and observations. One entry, dated just a few days after their arrival at Kethril 9, was particularly famous. It had been quoted in countless speeches and documents over the decades. "Today, a Vethrani official processed our registration without even looking at us," Maria had written. "He treated us like we didn't matter at all, like we were too small and insignificant to deserve his attention." I smiled and thanked him politely, and inside I thought, good, let them ignore us, let them dismiss us, let them underestimate us. We have nowhere to go but up, and someday, they will remember this moment and wonder how everything went so wrong for them. It won't be wrong because of anything we do to harm them. It will be wrong because they never understood that every being in this universe has value. Every species has something to offer. Every civilization, no matter how small, has the potential to change everything. She had been right. The humans had wandered into a galactic superpower and been barely noticed. That had been processed and filed and forgotten. They had been assigned a designation number and sent to live in the shadows with all the other insignificant species. And then they had changed the galaxy forever. Not through war, not through conquest, not through any of the methods the Vethrani understood. They had done it through something simpler and more powerful. They had looked at all the others who were being ignored and said, "We see you, we value you, let's work together." That was the beginning of everything that followed. Centuries later, when historians wrote about the great transformations of galactic civilization, they would always begin with the same image. A small, ugly ship appearing at the edge of Vethrani space, a board commander glancing at his sensors and shrugging, a processing official completing paperwork without interest, and a species of stubborn, creative, infinitely adaptable beings who refused to accept that their place in the universe was to be small and forgotten. The Vethrani had ruled for 12,000 years, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had stopped paying attention. And while they weren't looking, everything changed.